The alarm was a living thing. It screamed through the triage wing of the Viridian Central Hospital, a high-frequency pulse that meant one thing: environmental failure. Section 7. Oxygen scrubbers offline. The automated voice that followed was calm in the way only machines could be when everything was burning down. Atmospheric contamination detected. Evacuate sublevel 3. All medical personnel report to contamination protocol. Nobody moved fast enough. Dr. Valenthar watched the casualty numbers climb on the central display. 23 critical. 11 dying. 4 dead in the last 15 minutes, and that was before the scrubbers failed. His primary manipulators trembled against the console, the pale blue skin of his knuckles pulling tight over joint ridges. He was a Firian. Tall, slender, built for precision surgery, not chaos. His species had spent 3,000 years perfecting medical science. They had eradicated 237 classified diseases. They had never lost a patient to post-operative infection in his lifetime. Tonight he had lost 4, and he did not understand why. Sublevel 3 is sealed, he said, his translator chime flattening the harmonic layers of his native language into something clinical and cold. We have 15 patients trapped in the lower contamination zone. Life support reserves estimate 43 minutes. Chief Surgeon Malketh Tor did not look up from his display. The Kelvani were built differently than Firians, thicker, slower moving, with a secondary respiratory system that processed airborne toxins through a series of folding membranes behind their ribs. They were also, in Valen's private opinion, stubborn to the point of self-destruction. Evacuation is not possible, Malketh Tor said. The access shaft collapsed during the initial surge. We drill through or we wait for emergency response. Emergency response is 30 minutes out. Then we wait. 4 of my patients are already dead. Malketh Tor finally turned. His primary eyes were deep-set, amber, cold. Your patients died because you misdiagnosed the coagulopathy. The bleeding was internal and you missed it. Valen's secondary eyelids flickered, a Firian tell of suppressed anger. The coagulopathy presented atypically. Platelet analogs degraded within minutes of onset. No standard protocol predicted that pattern. Then you should have improvised. I am a surgeon, not a miracle worker. The alarm shifted pitch, lower now, more urgent. Valen had never heard that tone before. He didn't need to ask what it meant. The display answered for him. 12 more patients. New arrivals. Military transport crash. Atmospheric entry failure. Burn trauma. Impact trauma. Unknown chemical exposure. The triage board turned red. We don't have beds, someone said from the back of the room. Valen didn't recognize the voice. He didn't look. He was already moving toward the receiving bay, his long legs carrying him across the polished floor in 3 strides. The doors opened, and he stopped. The human was already there. She was kneeling beside a Kelvani soldier whose left arm had been burned down to the secondary muscle layer. The smell was wrong. Not just charred tissue, but something chemical beneath it. The soldier was conscious, which was impossible. Kelvani nervous systems shut down at 20% dermal loss. This soldier had closer to 40. The human had her hands on him. Not surgical manipulators, not sterile gloves. Bare hands, fingers pressed into the meat of his shoulder where the burn ended and healthy tissue began. Don't move, she said. Her voice was low, calm, entirely wrong for the environment. Valen blinked. Who are you? She didn't look up. I need a pressure seal, something that can conform to irregular surfaces. Foam-based if you have it, gel if you don't. I asked you a question. And I asked for a pressure seal. She finally glanced at him. Her eyes were dark, ringed with exhaustion, focused in a way that made Valen feel like he was the one being scanned. He's bleeding from somewhere I can't see. His respiratory rate is elevated, but his secondary system is compensating. That means the primary injury is vascular, not pulmonary. If I let go, he'll exsanguinate in under 2 minutes. Valen looked at the soldier's wound again. He saw the burn. He saw the chemical residue. He did not see the vascular injury she was claiming. There is no arterial bleed, he said. There is. It's recessed behind the burn necrosis. You can't see it because your imaging doesn't penetrate the char layer at this resolution. But his radial pulse is thready, and his secondary system is pulling fluid from his primary circulation to maintain pressure. That means his primary vascular volume is dropping, which means he's bleeding internally. Valen opened his mouth to argue. The soldier convulsed. The human didn't flinch. She shifted her weight, pressed harder, and the soldier's convulsion stopped. Controlled, deliberate. She had anticipated it. Pressure seal, she said again. Now. Valen turned to the supply cabinet. He did not know why he was listening to her. He did not know who she was. But the soldier's vitals were dropping on his personal monitor, and the human was the only one doing anything that looked like it might work. He grabbed the foam seal, handed it to her. She applied it in a single motion. No hesitation, no adjustment. The foam expanded, conformed to the soldier's shoulder, and the bleed stopped. Valen watched the vitals stabilize. Not fully, but the drop halted. The human sat back on her heels. Her hands were covered in Kelvani blood, copper green, viscous, still warm. She wiped them on her pants. Hospital policy violation. Dozens of them. She didn't seem to care. "Who are you?" Valen asked again. "Lena Chen," she said. "Former combat medic, 4th Ferian Expeditionary Force. Discharged 6 months ago." Malketh Tor appeared behind Valen, his bulk blocking the light from the corridor. "This is the human," he said. His voice was flat, not surprised, displeased. Lena stood up. She was shorter than both of them, broader through the shoulders, built for endurance rather than speed. Her face was smeared with green blood and something darker. Burn residue, maybe. Or something worse. "I submitted my credentials 3 weeks ago," she said. "Your credentialing board rejected my application, said my training was non-standard and my experience incompatible with Viridian medical protocols." "That is correct," Malketh Tor said. "You are not qualified to practice medicine in this facility." "I'm not practicing medicine. I'm keeping people from dying while your qualified staff stands around watching alarms blink." Valen winced. He had been watching alarms blink. He had been running protocols, checking displays, waiting for answers that weren't coming. She was right, and he hated that she was right. Malketh Tor's secondary eyes opened. A Kelvani threat display. "You will leave this treatment bay immediately. Security will escort you." The alarm changed again. This time, the voice that followed was different. Not automated. A person. The hospital's emergency coordinator, speaking from the central command hub. "All medical personnel to triage level 1. Mass casualty event in progress. Repeat. All medical personnel to triage level 1. 28 incoming patients. Estimated arrival 4 minutes." Malketh Tor's threat display vanished. His primary eyes went wide. 28? "The transport crash," Valen said. "That's the rest of the crew." Lena was already moving toward the supply cabinet. She pulled out 3 trauma kits, 2 portable monitors, and a roll of something that looked like fabric but shimmered when it caught the light. "What are you doing?" Malketh Tor demanded. "Preparing for 28 incoming patients with unknown chemical exposure and traumatic injuries in a facility that just lost its sub-level 3 oxygen scrubbers and has 4 dead from an unidentified coagulopathy." She slung the kits over her shoulder. "What does it look like I'm doing?" "You are not authorized." "I don't care." She walked past him. Didn't run. Walked. Calm. Deliberate. The same way she had knelt beside the soldier. The same way she had applied the pressure seal. No wasted motion. No excess emotion. Valen followed her. He didn't decide to follow her. His legs just moved. The triage bay was chaos. Orderlies running. Nurses shouting. Monitors beeping in a rhythmic panic. But the human walked through it like she had seen it before. Like she had walked through worse. "You were a combat medic," Valen said, catching up to her. "Yes." "In the Expeditionary Force?" "Yes." The 4th was deployed on the Keth Varan front. She glanced at him. A flicker of something. Not pain. Recognition. "You know your human military history. I know that the 4th suffered 80% casualties in the first 6 months of the Keth Varan campaign. I know that human medical personnel on that front worked without proper supplies, without evacuation support, and without sleep for weeks at a time. He paused. I know that the survival rate for human soldiers in that theater was higher than any other species in the coalition. Lena stopped walking, turned to face him fully. That's not a coincidence. I didn't think it was. Your credentialing board did. They said my field techniques were unsuitable for a controlled clinical environment. They said my diagnostic methods were reliant on pattern recognition rather than algorithmic certainty. They said I was unqualified to work in a hospital that treats species whose biology I don't fully understand. And yet you stayed. I live 3 blocks from here. I heard the alarms. I walked over. She adjusted the strap of the trauma kit across her chest. What's your name? Dr. Valen Thar, triage surgery. Dr. Valen Thar. She said it carefully, like she was learning a new word. How many of your patients have died tonight? The question hit him like a physical blow. 4. And how many of those 4 had the same presenting symptoms? He frowned. I don't understand. The coagulopathy, the bleeding. Did all 4 of them present with the same initial complaint? He thought back. The first patient, a cargo handler, came in with fatigue and mild respiratory distress, deteriorated within hours. The second, an engineer, same thing. The third, a pilot, same. The fourth, a dock worker, same. Yes, he said slowly. They did. And you treated them according to your protocols. Of course. And your protocols failed. The words hung in the air. Valen wanted to argue, wanted to defend his training, his species, the 3,000 years of medical science that stood behind every decision he made. But the bodies were still warm. 4 of them. He had watched them die. Yes, he said. My protocols failed. Lena nodded, like that was the answer she had been waiting for. Then maybe it's time to try something else. The first wave of crash victims hit the triage bay 4 minutes later, right on schedule. Valen had never seen anything like it. He had trained for mass casualty events, run simulations, practiced triage protocols until they were reflexive. But simulations didn't smell like this. They didn't sound like this. The screaming alone was worse than any alarm. 28 patients. Kelvani mostly with a scattering of Farians and 2 beings Valen didn't recognize. Tall, thin, with iridescent scales and multiple limbs. Their skin was flaking off in sheets. Chemical burns. Something caustic in the transport's atmospheric systems. Malketh Tor took command of the bay. He was good at command. Loud, decisive, impossible to ignore. Red tags first, bleeding and airway. Yellow tags wait, green tags assist. Move. Valen moved. He went to the nearest red tag, a Kelvani female with a compound fracture of her primary leg and a head wound that exposed the protective plate beneath her skin. She was conscious, which meant her secondary system was still compensating, but her vitals were unstable. He reached for his diagnostic scanner. It didn't work. He tapped it, shook it, checked the power cell. Full charge. Display active. But when he passed it over the patient's wound, the readout came back garbled. Symbols he didn't recognize. Data streams that made no sense. The chemical exposure is interfering with standard diagnostics, Lena said from behind him. She was kneeling beside another patient, hands already bloody. I noticed it 10 minutes ago, with the soldier you wouldn't let me treat. Your scanners are calibrated for normal tissue chemistry. Whatever is in these patients is skewing the readings. Valen looked at his scanner again, then at the patient, then at Lena. How do you diagnose without scanners? She didn't look up. The same way I diagnosed on Keth Varan. Look, listen, touch, think. That's not medicine. That's guesswork. No. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the chaos like a blade. It's pattern recognition. Your species relies on certainty. You want a scanner to tell you exactly what's wrong before you act. Humans don't have that luxury. We act, and we adjust, and we keep acting until we run out of options or the patient runs out of blood. She pressed a dressing to her patient's chest. The fabric bonded to the skin, sealing a wound Valen hadn't even noticed. This one has a penetrating injury to the left thoracic cavity, she said. The chemical exposure is causing tissue fragility, so standard sutures will tear. You need a biodegradable adhesive that bonds at a lower temperature than your usual surgical sealants. We don't stock adhesives with variable bonding temperatures. Then you need to modify one. Modify. Your supply cabinet has a thermal regulator for fluid warmers. Bypass the safety lock, set it to low, and run the standard adhesive through it before application. It'll change the molecular bonding properties just enough to work. Valen stared at her. You want me to modify medical equipment in the middle of a mass casualty event. I want you to save your patient. She finally looked up. That's what I did on Kethvaran. We didn't have the right tools. We didn't have the right supplies. We had our hands and our heads and a lot of people who would die if we stopped to ask permission. A scream cut through the bay, high-pitched, young. Valen turned. A child, a young Kelvani, maybe 6 or 7 standard years, was thrashing on a gurney near the wall. His skin was mottled, patches of deep purple spreading across his chest. A nurse was trying to hold him down, but the child was stronger than he looked, stronger than any healthy Kelvani child should be. Lena was already moving. She reached the gurney before Valen could take 2 steps. She didn't try to restrain the child. She crouched down, put herself at eye level, and started talking. Valen couldn't hear the words over the noise of the bay, but he watched the child's thrashing slow, watched his secondary eyelids close, then open, watched his breathing shift from panicked gasps to something more controlled. Lena reached out, touched the child's hand, held it. The child stopped moving entirely. He's not injured, Lena said, loud enough for Valen to hear now. He's having a reaction to the chemical exposure, neurological. His nervous system is hyperactive. That's why he's seizing and why his skin is changing color. That's not a documented symptom, Valen said. It is now. She looked at the nurse. I need a sedative, but not the standard one. His metabolism is accelerated. Whatever he inhaled is acting as a stimulant. If you give him a normal dose, it'll wear off in minutes. You need something longer acting. The nurse hesitated, looked at Valen. Do it, Valen said. The nurse ran. Lena stayed with the child. She didn't let go of his hand. She kept talking, low, steady, the same calm voice she had used with the soldier. Valen watched her and felt something shift in his chest, something he didn't have a name for. The nurse returned with the sedative. Lena administered it herself, her fingers finding the injection site without hesitation. The child's eyes fluttered, closed. His mottled skin began to fade back to its normal pale blue. He'll need monitoring for the next 6 hours, Lena said. The chemical is still in his system. It might cause a secondary reaction. We don't have 6 hours, the nurse said. We don't have 6 beds. Lena looked at the triage bay, at the patients spilling out of every gurney, lying on the floor, propped against walls, at the staff running themselves ragged, making mistakes, missing details, at the 4 dead in the morgue and the 15 trapped in sub-level 3 and the 28 new arrivals who were already starting to show the same symptoms as the first 4. You're going to have to make some decisions, she said quietly. Hard ones. We don't give up on patients, Valen said. It's not how we practice medicine. It's not giving up. Lena stood up. Her knees cracked. She had been kneeling for too long. It's triage. You have a limited number of resources and a growing number of patients. If you try to treat everyone, you'll lose more than if you focus on the ones you can save. And who decides who can't be saved? You do. She met his eyes. That's what triage is. It's not about who's most urgent. It's about who's most likely to survive with the resources you have. Valen wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that Viridian Central Hospital did not make those kinds of choices, that every patient was equally valuable, that his duty was to save everyone. But the alarms were still screaming, the casualty numbers were still climbing, and 4 patients were already dead because he had followed his protocols instead of his instincts. Show me, he said. Lena tilted her head. Show you what? How you triage. How you see what I'm missing. He swallowed. His throat was dry. Show me why the 4th survived when everyone else didn't. For a long moment she didn't answer. Then she nodded once and turned back to the bay. "Start with the ones who are quiet," she said. "The ones who aren't screaming. The ones who are watching. In a mass casualty event, the loudest patients are often the least urgent. They have the energy to make noise. The ones who are dying, they're usually silent." Valen looked around the bay. She was right. The screaming came from the patients with broken bones, superficial burns, panic. But the quiet ones, the ones lying still, eyes open, barely breathing, those were the ones he had almost overlooked. "Those 4, Lena said, pointing to a cluster of patients near the back wall. "They have the same early symptoms as your first 4 fatalities. Fatigue, mild respiratory distress, skin discoloration that's easy to miss if you're not looking for it." Valen's blood went cold. The coagulopathy. Maybe. Or something else. But whatever killed your other patients is starting in these 4. If you don't intervene now, they'll be dead within 2 hours. "What do I do? I don't know how to treat it. My protocols failed." "Then stop using your protocols." Lena crossed to the supply cabinet, pulled out a portable blood analyzer. "Start with a full workup. Not the standard panel, scan for everything. Toxins, pathogens, metabolic byproducts. Look for something that doesn't belong. That will take hours. Then start now." She handed him the analyzer. "While you're doing that, I'm going to check on the soldier I stabilized earlier. If he's still stable, I'm going to try to figure out why the chemical exposure isn't affecting him the same way it's affecting everyone else. Why would it affect him differently? I don't know yet. But he was on the same transport, he was exposed to the same chemicals, and he's not showing the coagulopathy symptoms." She paused. Whatever's different about him might be the key to treating everyone else. Valen watched her walk away. She moved through the chaos like she belonged here, like she had always been here despite the credentialing board's rejection, despite Malketh Tor's hostility, despite everything. He looked down at the blood analyzer in his hands, then at the 4 quiet patients near the back wall. He started the workup. 2 hours later, Malketh Tor finally noticed what was happening. He had been running the triage bay with mechanical efficiency, assigning patients, directing staff, making decisions at a rate that would have burned out a less experienced surgeon. But efficiency wasn't enough. The casualty numbers were still climbing. 6 more patients had deteriorated despite treatment. 2 had died. "What is she still doing here?" Malketh Tor demanded, gesturing at Lena with a primary manipulator. Valen looked up from the blood analyzer. The workup was almost complete. He had found 3 metabolic anomalies that didn't match any known disease. He had cross-referenced them against the chemical exposure data from the transport. Nothing matched. "She's helping," Valen said. "She is not authorized. She saved the Kelvani soldier with the burn. She stabilized the child who was seizing. She identified the 4 patients who are showing early coagulopathy symptoms. Symptoms I missed." Malketh Tor's secondary eyes opened. "You missed symptoms? We all did. The presentation is subtle. Fatigue, mild respiratory distress. It looks like standard post-trauma response, but it's not. It's the beginning of whatever killed our first 4 patients." "And the human diagnosed this?" She noticed a pattern. She asked questions. She didn't rely on scanners that are being interfered with by the chemical exposure. Valen stood up. His legs were tired. He couldn't remember the last time he had sat down. "Chief Surgeon, I don't know if she's qualified by your standards. I don't know if her training meets our protocols. But I know that she is seeing things we are missing, and our patients are dying because we are too rigid to listen to her." Malketh Tor stared at him. The threat display flickered, faded. "You are recommending that I authorize a non-credentialed human to practice medicine in my hospital. I am recommending that you stop letting your pride kill your patients." The words hung in the air. Valen had never spoken to a superior officer like that. He had never needed to. His career had been clean, orderly, predictable. He had followed protocols. He had respected hierarchy. He had done everything right. 4 patients were dead anyway. Malketh Tor's jaw tightened. His primary eyes narrowed. For a moment, Valen thought he was going to be removed from the triage bay, maybe fired, maybe worse. Then the Kelvani exhaled, a long, slow breath that deflated his chest plates. What does she need? Valen blinked. What? The human. What does she need to do her work? Malkath Tor's voice was quiet now. Tired. We have 15 patients trapped in sub-level 3 with less than 30 minutes of life support left. We have 28 crash victims, 6 of whom are deteriorating from an unknown cause. We have a chemical exposure that is interfering with our diagnostics, and a coagulopathy that is killing patients faster than we can identify it. He paused. I am out of ideas. If she has any, I want to hear them. Valen turned, looked for Lena. She was standing at the central display, her fingers moving across the interface with surprising speed for someone who had never been trained on Viridian systems. She had pulled up the schematics for sub-level 3, the life support readings, the patient locations. We have 22 minutes, she said without looking up. If we're going to get those patients out, we need to do it now. The access shaft is collapsed, Valen said. We can't reach them. We can't reach them through the shaft. But there's a maintenance conduit on the north side of the sublevel. It connects to the primary ventilation system. If we cut through here, she pointed to a junction on the schematic, we can bypass the collapse. That conduit isn't rated for personnel, Malkath Tor said. It's barely wide enough for a Kelvani child. It's wide enough for me. Valen stared at her. You want to go into the contamination zone? Someone has to. The patients in sub-level 3 are showing the same early symptoms as your coagulopathy cases. If they're going to survive, they need treatment now, not in 22 minutes when their life support runs out. She turned from the display. I'm smaller than any of your staff. I can fit through the conduit. I've worked in contaminated environments before. And I'm the only one in this room who's already figured out that your standard treatments aren't working. You'll die, Malkath Tor said. Maybe. Lena pulled a respirator mask from the supply cabinet. But those patients will definitely die if no one goes in. That's not a hard calculation. She strapped the mask over her face, grabbed a portable medical kit, checked the seal on her gloves. Valen caught her arm. Wait. She looked at his hand on her arm, then at his face. The blood workup, he said. I found 3 metabolic anomalies. They don't match any known disease, but one of them. He pulled up the data on his personal display. It's consistent with a cellular toxin I've never seen before. It's not from the transport's chemical exposure, it's something else. Lena studied the data. Her eyes moved fast, scanning, processing. This toxin targets the same pathways that your standard coagulopathy treatments use. That's why your protocols failed. You were treating the symptom, but the toxin was blocking the treatment at a cellular level. Then how do we treat it? We don't, not yet. She released her arm from his grip. But knowing what it is means we can stop using treatments that make it worse. Keep the patient stable. Don't give them anything that targets the coagulation cascade. Focus on supportive care until I get back. Get back from where? Sub-level 3. She adjusted the medical kit on her shoulder. I need to see if the patients down there have the same toxin in their systems. If they do, I need to figure out where it came from. Because if this is spreading, if it's not just from the transport crash, then we have a bigger problem than mass casualties. She walked toward the maintenance conduit access. Valen followed her. So did Malkath Tor. So did half the staff in the triage bay. Lena stopped at the conduit hatch, looked back at them. What are you doing? Watching, Valen said, in case you need help. I'll need help getting 15 patients out of a sealed sublevel through a maintenance conduit. I can't carry them all. We'll figure that out when you get there. He hesitated. Just be careful. Lena's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. Something smaller. I'm always careful. She opened the hatch and disappeared into the darkness. The conduit was tight. Lena had known it would be tight. She had crawled through worse on Keith Varan. Collapsed bunkers, damaged transport hulls, tunnels that smelled like things she tried not to remember. But this was different. This was alien metal pressing against her shoulders, alien air filtering through her respirator, alien sounds echoing through the walls. She focused on moving. Arms forward, pull, knees up, push. The conduit sloped downward, taking her deeper into the hospital. The temperature dropped. The light from her headlamp reflected off walls that were slick with condensation. 15 patients. 22 minutes of life support when she started. Less now. She pushed faster. The conduit opened into sub-level 3 through a maintenance panel that had been pried open from the inside. Someone had tried to escape. Hadn't made it. The body was a Firian male, mid-life, wearing maintenance coveralls. His skin was the same mottled purple as the child upstairs. He had died with his hand still reaching for the panel. Lena stepped over him and into the sub-level. The contamination zone was worse than she had expected. The air was thick with something she could taste even through the respirator. Bitter, chemical, wrong. The lights were flickering. Most of the environmental displays were dark. The only sound was the hiss of failing life support and beneath it the quiet sounds of people waiting to die. She found them in the main processing area. 15 patients, just like the display had said. Hospital staff who had been working in the sub-level when the scrubbers failed. Lab technicians, orderlies, a few doctors, all of them showing the same symptoms: fatigue, respiratory distress, the early stages of the mottled skin discoloration. But one of them was different. She was a young Firian female, maybe 20 standard years old, curled up against the far wall. Her skin was pale, paler than it should be, pale like she was bleeding internally. But when Lena checked her pulse, it was strong. Too strong. Her heart was racing, pushing blood through her system at a rate that should have caused a stroke. "What's your name?" Lena asked, kneeling beside her. The young Firian's eyes fluttered open. They were unfocused, pupils dilated. "Nissa," she whispered. "I'm Nissa." "Nissa, I'm Lena. I'm here to help. Can you tell me what happened?" The scrubbers failed, the alarms went off, everyone started feeling sick. She coughed. Something dark came up. "I tried to get to the maintenance panel. I couldn't. The door was locked." "The door to the conduit?" "No, the door to the research lab." Nissa pointed weakly toward a corridor on the far side of the processing area. "I was working in the lab when the scrubbers failed. I tried to warn everyone, but the door locked behind me. I couldn't get back in." Lena looked at the corridor, at the door at the end of it. Heavy, sealed, warning lights flashing above it. "What kind of research lab?" "Toxicology." Nissa's hand found Lena's arm, squeezed. "We were studying chemical weapons from the war, old stockpiles. The hospital wanted to develop countermeasures." Her breathing hitched. "One of the samples broke, right before the scrubbers failed. I think it got into the ventilation system." Lena's mind clicked into place. Not a transport crash, not a chemical exposure from the military accident. A containment breach. The toxin in the patient's systems, the coagulopathy, the metabolic anomalies, the chemical exposure interfering with diagnostics. It wasn't coming from the crash victims. They had been exposed after the fact when they were brought into the hospital. The real source was here, in sub-level 3, leaking into the ventilation system and spreading through the entire facility. "How long ago did the sample break?" Lena asked. 3 hours. Nissa's eyes closed. "Maybe 4. I don't know. I can't think straight." 3 hours. Enough time for the toxin to spread through the hospital's air handling system. Enough time to reach the triage bay, enough time to start killing people. Lena pulled out her communicator. "Valen, can you hear me?" Static. Then his voice thin and distant. "Lena, are you all right? I found the source. There's a containment breach in a toxicology lab on sub-level 3, chemical weapons stockpile. The toxin is in the ventilation system. It's been spreading for hours." Silence. Then, "That's not possible. The hospital doesn't have chemical weapons." "It has a research lab studying them. Ask Nissa. She works here. She'll confirm." More silence. Lena could imagine Valen turning to look at the other staff, seeing their faces, realizing that the hospital had been keeping secrets. "What do we do?" Valen asked finally. "You need to evacuate the upper levels. Anyone who's showing symptoms needs to be isolated. Anyone who's not showing symptoms needs to get out of the building. The toxin is airborne. It's in the ventilation system. Until we shut down the air handlers, it's still spreading. And the patients in sub-level 3? Lena looked around the processing area. 15 people. 15 lives. She had come down here to save them. But now she understood the calculation differently. The toxin concentration is highest down here, she said. That's why their symptoms are more advanced. If I try to move them through the conduit, the exertion will accelerate their metabolisms and spread the toxin faster. They'll die before they reach the surface. Then what do? We treat them here. We figure out a countermeasure. And we pray that it works before their life support runs out. She didn't wait for his response. She cut the connection and turned back to Nissa. The research lab, she said. Is there data in there? Research notes? Anything that could help us figure out how to treat this? Nissa nodded weakly. The primary research terminal, it's in the lab. But the door is sealed. You can't get in without the access code. Do you have the access code? I had it. I don't remember. The toxin is affecting my memory. Tears slid down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Lena squeezed her hand. Don't be sorry. You didn't cause this. Someone else made a choice to bring those weapons into a hospital. That's not on you. She stood up, looked at the sealed door at the end of the corridor, then at the maintenance panel she had crawled through, then at the 15 patients waiting to die. She had 20 minutes of life support left. Maybe less. She went to the door. The research lab was dark. Lena had to break through the door's emergency override with a manual bypass, a trick she had learned from a Kelvani engineer on Keth Foran, who had since died of wounds that couldn't be treated. The door opened with a groan of protesting metal, and the smell that came out was worse than anything she had encountered in the corridor. She stepped inside. The lab was small. A few workstations, a shattered containment unit in the corner, glass still glittering on the floor, and on the primary research terminal a data stream that was still active despite the contamination. Lena sat down at the terminal, started reading. The research was thorough, detailed. Whoever had been running this lab had done good work. They had cataloged the chemical weapon's properties, its transmission vectors, its effects on different species. They had developed potential countermeasures. They had even run simulations on how to treat exposure. But they hadn't finished. The data stopped 3 days ago. The last entry was a note from the lead researcher. Countermeasure candidates identified require live tissue testing awaiting approval that never came apparently. Someone had shut the project down. Someone had locked the lab. Someone had left the shattered containment unit and the broken sample and the toxin that was now killing people throughout the hospital. Lena pulled up the countermeasure candidates. There were 3. One was a standard cellular repair agent. Wouldn't work. The toxin blocked the same pathways. One was a metabolic inhibitor. Might work, but would shut down the patient's secondary systems, which they needed to survive the chemical exposure. The third was something else. It was an experimental compound, synthesized from a combination of Ferian and human biochemistry. The research notes were sparse. The lead researcher had only just started working on it before the project was shut down. But the theory was sound. The compound would bind to the toxin molecules and neutralize them without interfering with the patient's metabolic functions. The problem was that it hadn't been tested. The problem was that the synthesis required materials that weren't in the lab. The problem was that Lena had no idea if it would work. She sat back in the chair, closed her eyes. She could hear the patients in the processing area. Quiet, waiting, dying. She thought about the soldier she had stabilized earlier, the one who wasn't showing coagulopathy symptoms, the one who was different. Different how? She pulled up his medical data on the terminal. The hospital had a record of his admission, basic information, nothing detailed. But there was a note in his file, a blood type that was rare among Kelvani, a genetic marker that indicated past exposure to... Lena's eyes snapped open. The soldier had been exposed to the same chemical weapon before. Years ago, during the war. He had survived because his body had developed a natural resistance. That was why he wasn't showing the same symptoms as the other patients. That was why his blood work looked different. His blood contained antibodies. Antibodies that might be used to synthesize a treatment. She grabbed her communicator. Valen, I need you to do something. Anything. The soldier I stabilized earlier, the one with the burn. I need a blood sample, as much as you can safely take, and I need you to send it down through the maintenance conduit. A blood sample? For what? To save everyone in sub-level 3. She gave him the instructions. Fast, clear, no room for misunderstanding. Then she started synthesizing the countermeasure. The process took longer than she wanted. The lab's equipment was damaged, running on backup power, operating at half efficiency. She had to improvise, bypass safety protocols, mix compounds by hand when the automated systems failed. The blood sample arrived 20 minutes later, pushed through the conduit in a sealed container. Valen had included a note. The soldier is stable. He agreed to this. He said to tell you that humans aren't the only ones who can make hard choices. Lena smiled grimly. She hadn't smiled in hours. It felt strange on her face. She extracted the antibodies from the blood sample, combined them with the experimental compound, watched the mixture change color, thicken, stabilize. Then she loaded it into an injector and went back to the processing area. 15 patients, 15 lives. Less than 10 minutes of life support left. She started with Nisa. The young Ferian's eyes were closed. Her breathing was shallow. Her skin was the deep purple of advanced toxin exposure. She looked dead already. Lena pressed the injector to her neck, triggered the dose, waited. Nothing happened. Then Nisa's eyes opened. Her breathing deepened. The purple in her skin began to fade slowly, like sunrise creeping over a horizon. Lena, she whispered. I'm here. Lena's voice cracked. I'm right here. She moved to the next patient, and the next, and the next. By the time she finished, the life support alarms were screaming. The air was thin. Her own lungs were burning despite the respirator. But all 15 patients were breathing. All 15 were alive. She slumped against the wall. Her hands were shaking. Her vision was blurring. She didn't know if it was exhaustion or the toxin or both. The communicator crackled. Lena, can you hear me? Valen's voice, urgent. Yeah. Her voice was barely a whisper. I hear you. The evacuation is complete. We've isolated the upper levels. The air handlers are shut down. You need to get out of there. The life support in sub-level 3 is almost gone. I know. Then why aren't you moving? Lena looked at the 15 patients. At Nisa, who was sitting up now, her color almost normal. At the others, stirring, opening their eyes, looking around in confusion and wonder. I'm not leaving without them, she said. You can't move 15 patients through that conduit, not in the time you have left. Then you'd better find another way. She cut the connection, closed her eyes, listened to the hiss of failing life support and the quiet sounds of people who were no longer dying. She had done what she came to do. The rest was up to someone else. The rescue team reached sub-level 3 12 minutes later. They came through a secondary access shaft that Valen had identified on the schematics, a maintenance route that had been decommissioned years ago but was still structurally intact. They brought stretchers, oxygen, emergency medical kits, and they brought Malketh Tor. The chief surgeon entered the sub-level like a man walking into a battlefield. His primary eyes swept across the processing area, cataloging every patient, every piece of equipment, every sign of what had happened here. He stopped when he saw Lena. She was sitting against the wall, arms wrapped around her knees, respirator mask hanging loose around her neck. Her face was pale. Her hands were still shaking, but her eyes were open, and she was watching him. You saved them, Malketh Tor said. It wasn't a question. I tried. You succeeded. He looked at the 15 patients, alive, stable, recovering. Then at the shattered containment unit in the research lab. Then at the data on the terminal, still glowing in the dim light. The hospital will have to answer for what happened here. The weapons research, the containment failure, the cover-up. He paused. But that's not today's problem. What is today's problem? Getting everyone out of here before the life support fails completely. He held out a hand. Can you walk? Lena looked at his hand. At the ridges on his fingers, the pale blue skin, the careful way he held himself like he was afraid she might refuse. "I can walk," she said. She took his hand. He pulled her to her feet. She swayed, caught herself, steadied. "The countermeasure you synthesized," Malketh Tor said as they moved toward the exit. "Does it work on all the patients?" "It should, but I only had enough for the ones down here. You'll need to synthesize more for the patients upstairs." "The ones who are already showing symptoms?" "Yes." Malketh Tor nodded. "I'll put my best team on it. Your best team doesn't know how to synthesize it. Then you'll have to teach them." Lena stopped walking, turned to face him. "I'm not qualified." "No." Malketh Tor's secondary eyes were closed now. His threat display was gone. He looked tired, old, stripped of his authority in a way that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with humility. "You're not qualified by our standards. Your training is non-standard. Your methods are unorthodox. Your diagnostic techniques are based on pattern recognition rather than algorithmic certainty." He paused. "But 4 of my patients are dead because I followed our standards. And 15 of my patients are alive because you ignored them." He met her eyes. "I don't know what qualification means anymore, but I know that you belong here, if you want to stay." Lena looked at the patients being carried out on stretchers. At the research lab where she had synthesized the countermeasure with damaged equipment and borrowed time. At the maintenance conduit she had crawled through to reach people no one else could reach. She thought about the credentialing board, the rejection letter, the words unqualified and incompatible, and non-standard. She thought about the soldier who had given his blood to save strangers, about Nissa, who had lost her memory but not her hope, about Valen, who had followed her when protocol told him to stay. "I'll stay," she said, "for now." Malketh Tor almost smiled. "That's all I'm asking." They walked out of sublevel 3 together, leaving the alarms and the darkness behind. The hospital was still standing when Lena woke up. She had fallen asleep in a chair in the corner of the pharmacy, surrounded by half-synthesized compounds and empty injectors and the wreckage of a night that had killed 4 people and saved 43. Someone had draped a blanket over her shoulders. Someone else had left a cup of something warm on the table beside her. She didn't know who. She didn't care. She sat up, stretched. Her body ached in places she didn't know she had. The pharmacy was quiet. The alarms had stopped hours ago. The triage bay was empty. Patients moved to isolation wards. Staff sent home to rest. The chaos replaced by the kind of exhausted stillness that followed every disaster. Valen was sitting at the counter across from her, reviewing data on a portable display. He looked as tired as she felt. "You're awake," he said. "Unfortunately." He set down the display. "The countermeasure is working. All 43 surviving patients are stable. We're synthesizing more for the ones who were exposed but haven't shown symptoms yet." "The soldier?" "Recovering. He asked about you." "Tell him I said thank you." Valen nodded. Then he hesitated. "The research lab, the chemical weapons. We didn't know. Any of us. The hospital administration kept it secret. They're being investigated now. There will be consequences." "There should be." "Yes." He looked at her. "Lena, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." "Okay." "How did you know? How did you see what we were missing?" She thought about it, about Kethvaran, about the soldiers who had died in her arms because she didn't have the right tools or the right training or the right anything except stubbornness and hope. "On Kethvaran, we didn't have protocols," she said. "We had patients, and every patient was different. Different injuries, different species, different ways of dying. You couldn't treat them the same way twice. You had to watch, listen, figure out what made each one unique." "That sounds exhausting." It was. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "But it taught me something. Protocols are shortcuts. They're useful when things are normal, but when things go wrong, really wrong, protocols kill people. Because protocols assume that every patient fits the pattern, and patients never fit the pattern." Valen was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Your credentialing board was wrong about you." "They weren't wrong. I'm not qualified by your standards. I don't know your species biology as well as you do. I don't know your protocols, I don't know your equipment, and yet you saved more lives tonight than any of us. Because I wasn't following protocols, I was following patients. She stood up. Her legs were wobbly, but they held. That's what humans do. We adapt. We improvise. We figure out what's in front of us, and we deal with it because the alternative is watching people die. That's not a medical skill. No. Lena walked to the door of the pharmacy, looked back at him. It's a human skill, and it's the only one that matters when everything goes wrong. She left him sitting there staring at the display, probably rethinking everything he had ever learned about medicine. Outside, the sun was rising over the city. The hospital's lights were dimming, power restored to normal levels, the emergency generators finally silent. Staff were arriving for the day shift, yawning, carrying cups of stimulants, unaware of what had happened while they were asleep. Lena stood in the entrance and watched them. She didn't know if she would stay. The credentialing board would probably reject her again. The hospital administration would probably try to cover up what had happened. The political fallout from the chemical weapons research would probably make everything complicated and ugly and exhausting. But for now, she was here. And 43 people were alive because she had walked into a hospital that didn't want her and refused to leave. That was enough. That had to be enough. She turned and walked back inside. There was work to do, patients to check on, a countermeasure to synthesize, a world to change, one stubborn, unqualified human at a time. The alarms were silent. For now.